Well, welcome back, folks. Today we're going to do a bit of an update on what I've been doing with the SL125 project. We're going to do a little walkabout of the bike itself, and I'll bring you up to speed on some of the reassembly I've been doing over the recent time period. Clearly, the most obvious thing you should see here is that it's up on its wheels. I have both the front wheel mounted and of course the rear wheel. So it's now up on its feet, which now allows me to get on with some other things, such as attaching the foot peg frame or bar that goes, underneath the engine here. That has to be powder coated yet. The first thing I need to do though is check the fitment, make sure that it's not bent, that being the bar itself isn't bent, because sometimes those get twisted and bent from people, running over jumps and their weight coming down on the bars, and they get bend and twist them. And I want to make sure it's straight. I will do a dry run attachment before I paint it, because if it is bent and it needs to be straightened, I want to do it before I paint it, obviously, rather than after. So I do have to check the fit of the foot peg bar yet. And of course then I can attach the skid or bash plate here, which is now ready to go as well, but I'm going to do the foot peg mount first. A couple of things. Let me zoom in here for you a little bit. You can see I have now mounted the regulator, and you got that all buttoned up inside of there, as well as the toolbox. I don't know if you can see that, but that's in there as well, and that's mounted. And on the other side of the toolbox is the air cleaner canister, which we'll talk about more in a few minutes. I've also, and again, you might have to forgive me here, I might be a little redundant with some other videos that I've already done. I don't remember where I left off last time, but certainly the ignition coil condenser, the ignition points are all mounted. The wiring there, I'm not convinced that is correct. So if anyone out there in TV land has more information regarding the original routing of the wiring harness or loom that goes up to the headlight shell, I'd appreciate hearing from you. I suspect that wiring loom or harness should go up underneath that mount there for the coil mounts to, and come up underneath and then go over the top of that pin right there that ties into the fuel tank. I suspect it comes more up this way. I do have some wiring diagrams in the original Honda service manual for later models, late 70s models, CB125, CL125s, etc. But I have not, as of this recording, found an original diagram or even a good photograph of the original routing of the wiring for this SL125. Now remember, this bike did not have a main wiring loom when I got it, so I've got to sort this out as we go. So if anyone has information, please let me know. You will also notice here I have not buttoned up all the wiring yet. That is, in this shot here you can see all the pigtails and the connectors. I will do that later on once I've got everything pretty much mounted, and I'll do all the wiring at one time. The stator assembly, of course, is mounted, and I've just, along with the neutral wire, and I've just kind of brought it up through there for now. I haven't done anything further with that. Front wheel is complete. The only thing I have left to do, of course, on the front wheel is finish up the attachment of the brake arm here on the hub. I do have to put the cotter pin or cotter key in, split pin, some folks call it, in the axle nut, and torque that nut. That has not been torqued yet. I just put the wheels on a day or so or two ago, so I haven't finished that up yet. The headlight ears that we talked about in some detail earlier, that is fabricating, or coming up rather, with a solution for the mounting of the headlight ears right there, those rubber grommets on the top and bottom. That worked out really well. I'm quite pleased with how that turned out, And as I indicated earlier, it's just about the right amount of tension on those ears that does allow them to rotate a bit, but they don't rattle or they're not loose. The tape on the down tubes that you see right there is just simply to protect the exposed legs from scratches right now. I'll leave that on probably for the duration until I get the front fender on, which will be much, much later. We're talking many months out probably before I can get the front fender mounted, because I got to paint it first, and it's the dead of winter here right now, and I won't be doing any painting of the bodywork till probably at least getting into May, if not June, because I have to do it outside, and that's months, quite a few months away at this point, so it'll be a while before the front fender gets mounted. So I'm just going to leave the tape there. It's not hurting a thing. Let me reposition, and we'll go back to the rear wheel, and we'll talk about that a little bit. In terms of the rear wheel and tire combination, is pretty straightforward. The only real comment I'd make on the mounting of the tire on the rim is that is one stiff little tire. For being relatively small at 325 by 18, that is very stiff rubber. That's every day as stiff as most big heavy knobbies I've worked with over the years. And it fought me a little bit because it is so stiff. The front tire was much more pliable. Of course, it's narrower, and it went on much easier than that one did. But we did get it on, and we didn't scratch the rims in the process, either front or the rear, so I consider it a success. Again, I don't like messing with tires and hubs and wheels much. It's just not my favorite thing to do, but we got by it. I do not have the chain for it yet. I'll buy a new chain, and that's on my list of things to do here going forward here in the next few days or a week. I have not mounted the chrome chain guard yet here. I'll do that after the chain is on and everything's adjusted up. So that wheel right now is just in there relatively loosely. It's not tightened up at all. You will see the split pin, the cotter pin is just dropped through the axle right now because that's not tightened up. That'll happen, of course, after I've got the chain on and have the wheel adjusted. Some of this I've talked about before, that little guide right there. I think I covered that in a previous video, so I'm not going to go through that in any more detail at this point. Regarding the rear wheel, that's really it. Again, it was quite straightforward, fairly academic outside of my wrestling match with the mounting of the tire. Let's move around to the other side of the bike, and we'll pick up this conversation on that. In terms of this side of the bike, really the only thing that I probably haven't talked about is the air cleaner canister that you see is mounted there. It's mounted loose, and what I mean by that, let me step around here. It's mounted loose from the perspective that the boot, that's what I'm talking about when I say loose, can rotate, because I don't know the final alignment of that until the carburetor is mounted. The canister itself is firm and rigid. That's hard mounted. Of course, here's the back of the... Speaking of the air cleaner housing and element, let's cut away here to a video I shot earlier before I installed it on the bike. I wanted to discuss a little bit of the internals of the air cleaner housing and what's going on inside of there, and then we'll come right back. Before I go ahead and remount the air cleaner housing back on the project, I wanted to cover a couple of things with you since I have it open right now. And once it's assembled on the bike, you won't be able to see all the internals. The housing itself right here is original to the bike. We talked about the re-powder coating of that in a previous video, so I'm not going to go through that in detail. It's a little smudged right now for me handling it, but be confident that it's in very good condition and it's not rusty. The foam element right here, the internal element, this is really what does the filtering. This is new and is still available and supported by Honda. It comes pre-oiled. I don't know if you can see any of that oil there on my hands. It's important to keep in mind that foam elements that are designed to be oiled, pre-oiled, and most of them are, must be oiled, because the oil actually acts as the primary medium that captures the debris and contamination. The foam is really there as a carrier for the oil, and though the foam certainly will capture some of the contaminants, being oiled is what really does most of the filtration, so it's important to make sure you oil those filaments that are designed to be oiled. And again, this one came pre-oiled from Honda. It was in a sealed plastic bag. It's just a matter of stretch fitting it over the housing here, as you can see there. This cover plate right here, which fits over that stud, though the original did come with the project, to be honest with you, I'd misplaced it. It had dropped to the bottom of my parts tub and got buried into some other things, and I missed it when I went looking for these parts to begin the process of sorting these out. So I went on eBay and I found this one NOS, and it was real inexpensive. I think it was around $8 US with shipping, and I had it delivered, and it's in perfect condition, of course. The original wasn't in bad shape. I could have stripped the zinc off and replated it and polished it. It probably would have looked almost as good as this one, but for $8 US, I'm not too concerned about it. So I do have a spare. This just fits over like that and compresses the foam ever so slightly. I've got new hardware here, that being the flat washer and a nut that secures the plate onto the stud. Let me see if I can get this started here. Easier said than done. And just snug that up a bit. You don't want to overdo this here. You just want to compress the plate into the foam, and keep in mind you may have to get that off someday, that is the foam, to clean it. And for that reason I don't use any kind of a Loctite on that thread. I just leave it dry like you can see there. So now this unit will then mount into the bike, so the next time you see this housing, it will be installed on the project. This is the air intake boot. This is not the original for the bike. In fact, there was no air intake boot on this project when I got it. It was missing, along with the clamp, this clamp that secures it on here. This fits something like that on the bike. And I'll have to stretch this over this fitting right here, this flange. But it didn't have any of this assembly. The clamp on this end, of the spring clamp right here on my right hand, is still supported by Honda. You can still buy that new. The boot itself is no longer supported. And this other clamp on the housing side is no longer available either. So this was a good used unit off of eBay. And I think you can see there what it looks like. I just threw it in the polisher for a couple of days. Bought a new one for this end, the spring clamp. The boot itself is an NOS unit from the Far East. Again, I think it came from Indonesia. As you can see there, it came in a Honda bag. It was all sealed. And you can see how soft and pliable it is. That was kind of expensive. That was around, I think around $40 US for this boot. You can buy repops out of Asia. I've read speculation or information from people that bought them that they tend to be a little bit too short on the carburetor end and they end up not quite fitting right. That's why I went ahead and spent relatively big money on getting an NOS boot. Again, of course, this is the carburetor end here, so this fits over the carburetor mouth. But I spent pretty big money because I wanted one that fit right. And even though the aftermarket repops looked pretty good in the pictures, and they're all over on eBay, by the way, and they're cheap. They're like, I'm going to say 10, 12, 15 US dollars. I wanted one that fit properly and know that it was not a question whether it will work when the time comes. So I'm going to go ahead now and mount this on the bike, and later on when I do a review of the project, further review of the project, you'll see it is. Speaking of the carburetor, that is one of the next things I'm going to be working on. Of course, I did quite a bit of work on that carburetor. If you were watching the Wild 1 series of videos, I did quite a bit of work on that probably 10 months ago, 10, 11 months ago now. But I have to finish it. There's more work to do yet. I cleaned it basically, but now I've got to do the final assembly and adjust the float, and so I can get that mounted back on the engine there. Then I can tighten up everything on the air boot. I have to order a set of cables. I can get a reproduction set of cables, a complete set of cables for this bike in the original Honda Silver Gray, which is what was used on these bikes, from one supplier, Marvel's Motors. They're a little pricey, but I have yet to order those. That's on my list to do as well here shortly, so I can get the cables in place. And you know, I'll do that, finish that part of it up when I get the carburetor mounted, so I can get the throttle and the handlebars mounted up there, of course, at the top of the steering stem. That, by the way, that nut is tight. I do not have oil in the forks yet. I don't think I mentioned that previously, but I do not have oil in the forks yet. And the top bolts right there on each side are just in there finger tight. They're not tightened in yet. I can't do that until I get the oil in the fork tubes. Of course, in the rear wheel, I'll have to finish up the installing the brake actuating arm on the cam there. You can see, I think, the rod sitting there waiting for me to install the rear brake pedal, which will be mounted down in here, of course. So that's ready to go. I just haven't gotten to that point yet. The engine side covers, the engine side covers will be one of the last things I put on before I put the engine oil in. The reason I don't mount the side covers, especially painted or polished side covers, these are painted on this project, is I don't want to scratch them or damage them by dropping a wrench or rubbing up against them with a belt buckle or a tool. And so I'm going to leave those both sides off as long as possible. And we'll mount those a bit later on, like I said, as late in the game as I can, of course. I'll have to do it before I put the oil in the engine, because otherwise we're going to have a problem. The exhaust system, which of course comes down through here, and I think I've talked about that a little bit before. I have a lot of work to do on the exhaust system. Where it ties into the engine up here, the collar, there's a collar that fits up in there, is gone, which is a common problem on the early I think SL100s and the 125s both had that problem. And I've got to come up with a solution for that, as well as the canister itself, which will come up in through here somewhere. It's got a big dent in it that I have to fix. So I'm not going to get to that right away. That'll be a little bit later on this winter. I'll probably get out my welder and think through some solutions and for those two problems, and I'm sure I'll be including you in that when I get there. Really, the last thing we need to talk about is I think the side stand, which you mount on the other side of the bike, is ready to go, and I've got the hardware ready to go. I just have to get around to mounting that, probably after I do the foot peg bar and the skidder bash plate. I think that'll be it for this video today, folks. Any issues, questions, thoughts, drop me a note. Otherwise, as usual, thanks for watching.